everyone, and welcome to Fathoms Deep, a Black Sails podcast from Common Room Radio. I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
I'm Daphne Olive, and we have today with us John Steinberg.
Hi, everybody.
For his second visit, John, we're so happy to have you back.
Very happy to be back. Excited. I'm excited to talk about the show.
I want to start out by saying, damn, you did it.
Beautifully done.
We did something.
Yes. Yeah. As far as we're concerned, you did good. It's really fantastic.
And surely you're proud. You have to be proud of the work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a safe place. We all love your show.
We are all very proud of it. We all miss it terribly, miss each other terribly. It is the unfortunate but unavoidable result of a process this good in a group this good is that when it ends, it's just not fun. But yeah, really proud of it, proud of the story, and feel like it, if judged by, could we go back 7 years or 6 years to when we sold it and watch the show, would we feel like we did right by it? And I think for sure, this was the show we wanted to make. And so, not a lot of people get to say that, and you certainly don't get a lot of opportunities to make that true. So,
yeah. Well, we've heard from a lot of the actors too, that look, they feel like no matter what else happens in their career from now on, they can look back and say, but I did this thing and this thing was good.
It's
that
really,
speaks very well too.
It makes you feel good. I mean, I think, the actors are in a very specific position with respect to the story, and that they are both outside it and in it. And so as a niche of the audience, I guess, their opinion is always really important to me. And so the fact that they were so in it and felt that way about it, I feel like was an indication we did something good. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, yes, we obviously feel that way. Even though, every once in a while we give you all shit in the podcast, but mostly,
of course,
think it's the always with love. So I wanted to say you have a long list of official titles. You are Black Sails co-creator, writer, producer, wrangler of pirates. We learned recently also sometimes called the Grim Reaper. And
I did not know that. That was news to me. But yes. The phone call you do not want.
Yes. Right. That's right.
No, that was an adorable story. That was the cutest story. We loved that very much.
That's true.
I felt very badly after that one. I can't remember if we knew it was happening. I vaguely remember when I'm supposed to call the two of them, and just the things get crazy. We realized 4 hours later, it's like, did we ever talk to them? Did they know why we were calling? And apparently not. So
nope.
No,
sorry.
they were just sitting there on the edge of that cliff. But that's not what I was referencing. What I wanted to say was that was one of your names, but one of your newest titles is director. So I wanted to hear how that was for you.
It was really interesting. I liked it. I mean, it's a weird process to shift from to go from writer to director. I think is a pretty specific thing. A lot of people have done it. To go from showrunner to director, especially in a show like this, where there's so much you're trying to control from one point of view, and there's so much that's really kind of happening after the fact. I mean, the show is kind of half an animated show. I mean, there's so much that's getting done in visual effects well after everybody leaves Cape Town, that I really wasn't sure, all right, how much of this have I kind of been doing a lot of anyway, and I'm ready for it, and what are the things I don't know?
Yeah.
And there were some things I didn't know. I think the speed of it and the complexity of it was really difficult at times. We spent the last week shooting 2 simultaneous units for that, the ship battle. And it was a lot. I mean, I had people with me who had done stuff like this before, but it was a lot for them. And so there were definitely moments where I felt myself losing control of the math a little bit. But when it slowed down a little bit, in the moments that I felt like I could understand it, it was what you want. I mean, I think ultimately this exercise is an exercise in conceiving something. And I think that means soup to nuts. You have the idea, you write it, you direct it, you cut it, you finish it. And I hadn't really had that level of control before, or that experience. And it felt like what I hoped it would feel like, which is, oh, there's no impediments to this. I will make this work or not work, based on whether or not I can figure it out. So it was good. I dug it. And the pressure of that episode also, it was, you just hope you don't fuck it up for everybody. And so I think I had a ton of help, and that made it significantly more plausible that it was going to work. But yeah, it was good. I had a good time.
Wow.
What was your favorite part of it to direct?
It's a good question. I think almost certainly that scene with Stevens and Luke in the forest, because that's where all of the, or not all, but a lot of the technical mishigas, as it were, falls away, and it's just storytelling and performance. And those guys are amazing and very patient.
So
and yeah, and it's like to work with the two of them with a scene that we felt like was working, and that was great. That was a good day.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it was really fun. And I think without a group they were exhausted, and I think they both come from doing who knows what with the other unit, and it just to have them there, in that space and being willing to go with it was cool. And I think the first day we shot that scene with Schmitz and Jess and Harriet in the library, the last scene between the three of them, which was daunting. I mean, she is, Harry Walters is,
for real.
Yeah. For the first person you're trying to direct, it was a little daunting, but she was amazing and sweet and great. And it made that day great. My family was actually on set that day too. My kids had just gotten there. So it was fun. It took me about 8 hours to shoot something that probably should have taken me about 4, but everyone was very forgiving. So
it was a fantastic scene. Well, okay. I can't really think of a scene in the last episode that wasn't a fantastic scene.
Yeah.
Those probably are my two favorites. Those are pretty amazing.
Yeah, they were fun.
All right. Well, if we're talking about that forest, let's talk about what I've been calling the dragon speech.
Yeah.
Oh, the dragon speech. John,
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that speech.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
yes.
you.
That. Yes, I talked about this quite a bit in our roundtable, is that speech has meant a lot to a lot of people, and we've gotten a lot of correspondence about that.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, it's pretty neat. So my question about Flint, we've seen Flint go through a lot. I mean, we've seen you put Flint through a lot. And a big topic we had in our roundtable, which is for people who are listening now, which is our last episode when we had Alistair Stevens, Lauren Sarner, and Andrew Dice as guests, is where is Flint in season 4? Like, we had some theories. I mean, I think it felt like, Liz, we were all kind of agreeing that Flint had really transformed into possibly really kind of where all of his parts had become integrated. How do you feel about where Flint is in season 4? I mean, maybe at the beginning of season 4 and at the end of season 4. Like, we kind of felt like he was in a good place most of it. And I mean, good place, not in a good place, in a healthier place, in a place where he
is. I think where I understood him to be, I guess both at the beginning and the end, but sort of within this story, was kind of as a guy who had run all but the last 100 yards of a marathon and could see the finish line. And every step he took got exponentially harder. And it was just an onslaught of obstacles and traps and problems that were trying to prevent him from getting there. And the conceit when we started with a whiteboard at the beginning of the season was that he would figure out a way to get through every last one of them and have his nose on the end zone. And it would be his best friend who was the one he couldn't get past, which felt right. I think that's in terms of breaking a season, when we talk about when we feel like we have architecture and when we start talking about episodes, I feel like when we had that was when it felt okay to start breaking details, because the story was about the right thing. And then I feel like if you miss or things aren't quite right, at least you're telling the right story. So I do think in a way it's very different from the first 3 seasons in the sense that the big dramatic question kind of isn't his. It had been in season 1, 2, and 3. And in season 4, the big dramatic question is Silver's, which was always going to happen, I think, in some respect. And I don't think it in any way backgrounds Flint. I think if anything, he's he's most important in this because he is finally the guy we are fully rooting for. But there is a clarity to it, I think, that that makes it feel different than the stories we had told for him before.
Right. Yeah. So my other question, this is in language that has become Fathom's deep language, but based on Liz's language, is do you feel like Silver sees Flint at that end in that conversation? Like, is he truly seeing Flint, or is he seeing an older version of Flint? Like, when I was just fascinated because Flint gives that speech, which Liz and I are both very, very, very attached to. And then Silver just brings it to rage. And I feel like Silver's seeing an older version of Flint. Like, is he?
I think from the get-go, this is really two narratives that are sort of interacting with each other. I think they're almost two different stories that find a way to embrace each other and appear as though they're one story. One is Silver's and one is Flint's. I think that in that moment, they are both, in some respects, as close as they have ever been, and in some respects, as opaque to each other as they've ever been, depending on whose story you're watching in that moment. You know, I think I came to the classics kind of late and in a bit of a weird way, but I had a professor in college who sort of helped distill Odyssey and Iliad into these two ideas, that Achilles is a character for whom glory and sort of glory seeking is the ultimate end, and Odysseus is a character who just wants to get home, and that in the tension of that is kind of, in some respects, all of drama. And so I think that's always been buried into the show, and I think that what clarifies that conversation the two of them are having is that it is sort of the most distilled version of that there's a guy who you can tell him all you want to tell him about government and about the cause and about all the good we could do. But he has a really good argument. I love my wife and I just want to go home. And there's nothing you're going to tell me that's going to make that not true. And I think the guy sitting across from him can look at him and see a coward and see a guy who's giving away the world, and nothing you can tell him is going to make that not true. And you know, for two people who are so close through all of season 4, they're almost indistinguishable from each other, to have this space between them, the space at which they were never connected, be the thing that separates them, felt right. Like that I think felt like the story was resonating and harmonizing with itself in all the right ways. And then it just becomes about scene execution. Like that scene felt like it had been, in a way, I think we broke the season to write that scene. I think, you know, at any point at which we were confused, you're always kind of looking forward, and it's like, where do I want to get to, and how do I want it to feel? And then that helps you to sort of figure out the middle pieces. So by the time you get there, it's almost a scene that's written itself. It hasn't written itself still forever, but you know,
we'd like to give you all a little bit of credit for writing it.
It was not easy, but at least it was. There wasn't a lot of concern that we weren't telling the right story at that point.
So when you've spoken in the past about kind of having a sense of what the ending would be from the beginning, was that scene essentially that you're talking about? Kinda,
yeah. I mean, I think the idea that we had at the beginning was that at the beginning was that it was a story about, and I think we've even talked about this before. It was a story about a guy standing on a rock in the middle of the ocean, shaking his fist at civilization, and that eventually he started to make that mean something and terrify them and win, and that he would be undone by the least likely complication. You know, a guy who could take on an empire and could change the world is undone by nobody, by somebody who, and I think that was why it was always important to me that I didn't want to know where Silver came from. It was important to not know where he came from.
Interesting. Okay.
That's
because
really
it kind of made him nobody. It made him this person who was just a guy. And wasn't important, and there's no twists to how he's connected to the story. He's just a guy.
Except that he's everybody for Flint.
Yeah. In a weird way, there's this kind of strange catalytic reaction between the two of them that neither of them saw coming. But to us, he's just a guy. To the story, he's just a guy. And somehow that just a guy is the undoing of a giant. And that felt right also. That felt like it was somehow weirdly baked into the spaces of the book, of Treasure Island, without ever really being there. And then that scene felt right. When you start thinking about that scene that way, it's like, yeah, this is pretty much what that should feel like.
Yeah, no, I mean, that totally works. I mean, it is fascinating that Silver is nobody and yet so important to Flint. The other thing that I had a long conversation with a listener that brought me back to Vane was that Flint could fight an empire, could fight civilization, could fight everything. And the one thing in the world that brought him down is something that we all have. This, this sense of, I want to protect, build a wall and protect my people.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that brings down the revolution, not the large scary things.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not hard to look at it in a way where the thing he has brought down, the conflict with Silver is extremely internal. You're watching Silver become Flint so that Flint can have a version of himself that he can have this conflict with and finally reach some conclusion about. I think that felt right also, that the just a guy was also a human being, and that Flint on some level kind of, in order for that conflict within himself to be resolved, all of the complications need to get stripped away. And then you're just staring at yourself in a mirror. And the one thing that's different is just this one event, this one awful traumatic event that isn't there. And it creates this massively different outcome on the other end. So, I mean, I think when it's working, there should be a lot of different ways to look at it. And hopefully it does have facets, and it has, it is to be interpreted. Which I think is probably a sign that there's the mechanics of it are working properly.
No, I think that's definitely the case. I mean, just from the correspondence we've had from listeners, there have been so many people who, kind of have analyzed it intellectually in different ways, but also have just on a very personal, emotional level experienced that conversation in different ways. And it's just, I think you all totally nailed it. You really did create a dynamic that is speaking to so many people in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, I would argue it is universal to feel disenfranchised to some extent. That there is no sort of perfect citizen, I guess. And that feeling, whether it's a big feeling or a small feeling, or it defines you or it doesn't, is there. It is a component of being a human being. And so that always feels like you're also, I think, telling the right story when you can always reduce it back to something that should be relatable to anyone.
Right.
And I think this, we wanted that last episode to be something of a closing statement to the argument. And so that moment, I think we knew before, anybody put pen to paper that was going to be the meat of it, of trying to sort of put a period at the end of the sentence.
No, and also, I mean, it's beautiful because you set up, I mean, it feels almost like the launching pad for the torture that Silver will have that we won't see in your story, but that will be that he now has this kind of beginning of an experience that might, lead to him searching for a treasure. Like that he will feel compelled to do something.
Yeah, that snuck up on me a little bit. I had forgotten that treasure was cursed in the book, and it snuck up on me. And I think in the process of constructing that scene became just the clearest thing in the world that was Flint's curse, that the curse was, you think you figured this out and you haven't. And at some point you will feel unfulfilled by shutting the world out. And by not by choosing to make domesticity a priority, but by choosing to make it the only priority, you will feel unfulfilled, and then you will come back looking for this thing. And so Flint has the last word in that moment, and that curse is now meaningful. It isn't ghosts and skeletons and whatever. It's a different spin on a show about domesticity. I think it is dark, I guess, a little bit, but also something that does suggest what Silver's story is going forward. Is he's happy until he's not. And then eventually he knows why he's not happy. And he can always remember the moment that he made that choice. And now the book is a different book. It means something else.
You're right. God, that's gorgeous.
This goes to a larger question, I guess, about reusing terminology, like reusing phrases. So I don't know if you'll be able to answer my question of like, how much do you like just like have a list of phrases in your head or on a board or on paper that you very, very, very specifically reuse over and over again. But the one about mattering, like the minute I heard Flint say the thing about mattering, it just immediately reminded me of season 2 when he said to Silver, "Where else would you matter?" And so we know already, like we came into this knowing that that's important to Silver on some level, whether he understands it or not.
I mean, I think if you're your hope and dream for this is that it's music and that it isn't always thought through necessarily. It just should feel right and sound right and have the right meter to it. And I think what that will frequently drag along with it is repetition and
melody and reprise. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. And just a feeling of I've heard this before, and now it means something a little different, and these themes are developing, and so a lot of it's that. Sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes it's very specifically intended to tie itself back to another conversation that even as you're writing it, you assume no one will ever put together.
Until you get people like us.
So deep in it, right? Exactly. But sometimes
shows
it's not.
like Daphne and Liz.
Right, exactly.
Hey, what? Andrew Dice, man. He like
That's true.
I mean, look, you have no idea how gratifying it is because a lot it's so internal when you're doing this, and you really do have that thought frequently of I'm working too hard. Like there's no way anybody's ever going to put these two pieces together. And then to not only hear you guys and those guys put those pieces together, but find other pieces that are there and I think are part of the story, but that I didn't know I put there is fun. It's I think as a way of understanding authorship in a different way. I think you are aware of some of the things you were authoring, and I think you are not aware of some of the things you were authoring. And sometimes it takes an audience or a reader or whatever to put it all together, which is fun. And it weirdly does make it this kind of communal experience, I guess.
Yes. See, those are the conversations that I want to have, like on the porch with scotch. But yes, not actually about Black Sails, but like work and creativity and writing. And anyway,
yes, I know we could take this down that road and maybe.
I know, but that's not what the show's for. I know.
But no, it is endlessly fascinating to me the things that that your head will put together without you knowing it.
Yes.
Which then gets, when people ask, like, was this on purpose? It's like, I don't fully know how to answer that question. Was I consciously aware of it when I did it? No, but I don't know that it's an accident either. There's stuff happening kind of in the background that I think is meaningful. And I think it's really hard to write without that. I think I don't have that ability to do that. I'm not able to sort of deliberately be aware of where all the pieces are coming. Sometimes it just kind of comes out of the ether and you just write it down.
I think that's true of great writers, capital G, capital W. It is not true of writers necessarily. So
I think great writers are aware of it. I think.
Oh, you think?
Or more aware of it. I sometimes feel a little bit like it's actually it like, to be perfectly honest, it's scary because if you don't know where it comes from, then you can't make it happen necessarily. And it's very hard to go through a process that you feel like at any point might just decide to go away. So it is a very strange process.
To that too. Wow.
All right, John, let's talk about it. There are a few categories of things that have been in the story from the beginning, have obviously been important parts of the storytelling that you all have done, that I feel like have many layers to them, and season 4 in particular brought new layers onto them. So one of those things is darkness. We brought up in particular in the roundtable the use not to always go back to the dragon speech, but I guess you actually just gave us permission to do that when you said that it was all leading there anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
It was just really interesting for us that in a story that talks so much about the duality within people of darkness and light, that though that darkness and light almost got flipped in a way in the dragon speech, that when Flint says that
Right.
that the shadows, oh, in the darkness, you actually wrote darkness, that in the darkness there is discovery and possibility and freedom. It just felt like a reframing of the idea of darkness. And do you have an opinion about how that relates to darkness as we've been talking about it in terms of people throughout? Which also has had many facets. I mean, it's not always been kind of the stereotypical dark is bad and light is good.
I think in the kind of in the exercise of hindsight of looking at what those last few episodes are, there's a weird thing that happened that I don't know if it was just because of the pace we were moving or if it's interesting and wasn't a mistake. But there are at least a couple of times, and I'll bet you there are more, where the same word is used in different contexts to mean very different things. I noticed it first in the ending with Rackham when he's talking about truth.
Yes.
Which at first felt like a mistake to me, weirdly, is how presented in post was. He's saying it doesn't matter if a story's true, but it matters if the story's true at the end. And it's like, shit, was it just a mistake? And then I started thinking about it. I was like, I don't think so. I think what he's talking about is truth in storytelling, in historical verifiability, is different than truth in art. And I think the use of the word in two different contexts is meaningful. I think the ideas are related. I think that when Flint is talking about darkness in season 3 in general, I think he is talking very specifically about the thing that is a part of a person's psyche, the thing that will force you to do things or tempt you to do things you would not want to do, if your best self would not want to do. And that is a danger inherent to the human condition. I think when he's talking about darkness and using the same word, but talking about it with Silver, I think he is talking about it in the artificial sense. The very specifically, he's talking about the casting of shadows, which is not darkness; it's the absence of light, which is different. And I think his very specific construction of it, that it is a thing that is created by people to achieve an end and to create the appearance of something that is bad or something that is to be avoided, when in reality there should be light shining there, is different. And I think it is potentially confusing, but I'm not sure that's bad. I think hopefully by the time we've gotten to this point, we can earn the right a little bit to have some of those themes that are developing get complicated.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And to allow them to embrace the contradictions, I guess. I mean, I think that's something that I think came out of early in the season, this idea that I think as storyteller, I was starting to feel these contradictions piling up. And it felt like a thing that if you're Flint and you are aware of narrative, you would be aware of too, that the closer you get to destination, the more the contradictions will pile up. And that's kind of how you know that the rhythm is building to.
Right. Isn't that what he said to Silver? Like when
yeah.
What did he say? That was when things get really complicated, we know we're getting close or something. What did he, something to that effect?
Yeah. And so I think this is one of those things, but I do think they are distinguishable in a meaningful way. And that in the distinction between them, there is story and there is more content to what he's saying. I think.
To me, it felt like the difference between an internal reality and the story that's told about someone, like that your internal darkness is a thing that you struggle with, and that the casting of shadows is the not true story like civilization's telling.
To clean it up, to clean it up a little bit, it's actually not. I think the absence of light is different from the obstruction of light. There should be light there. There wants to be light there, and there is somebody standing in the way. Is different than a place in which there is no light and never was. And I think that is a little bit the distinction he is trying to draw. That there are things that are not inherent to human nature that are portrayed as dark, but they don't have to be.
Yeah.
Yes. God, that's gorgeous, John.
I know. I have to just jump in for a moment and just say that one of my favorite things about season 4 and that speech is just how Flint finally got to a place where he took his own pain and his own anger and and managed to generalize it in that way where it actually encompassed even the people who are being told to be afraid of the dragons. Like that he had actually, for me, had reached a stage where he was having a generosity even to the people who are part of civilization who were also being controlled by this casting of shadows.
Yeah, it's the closest, I think, to there being some explicit acknowledgement of the idea that everyone there, despite their differences and despite their opposing agendas and their differences in circumstances, do share some common experience, which is sort of having felt like they were in that space. So, which felt like it wanted to be a component of that full stop. At the end of the argument.
Okay, so I have a question for you about backstories, even though you told us, and I love your explanation of why we don't get a backstory from Silver in relation to Flint. But you might have noticed that I have a bit of a thing, and we even talked about this last time you were on, about people coming to terms with their... Wait, how did Alistair separate it? With their inciting traumas versus their legends, like that Alistair had split it between that the backstory and the thing I've always been focused on people needing to learn from and get past is their trauma from their past, and that some of the characters build a legend, some very decidedly don't. Silver's a case where the legend is built for him. How do you see Silver not telling a backstory in relation to that, if you do at all? This might just be my fixation and something you don't particularly think about or wanted to embed in the storyline.
No, I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I think, I don't think it's that he doesn't have one.
Well, everyone has one.
Everyone has one. And I think when I watch it, the clear implication is that his is awful.
Right.
Which if the story is going out of its way to suggest it's unspeakable, considering the things we have spoken about, I, as an audience, I think am willing to take its word for it, I guess, is a way of putting it, that if you are invested in that character and you understand where all of the norms are set for the show, for someone to say, I can't say it out loud, suggests that it really is awful. And we played with versions of what it could be. And the moment you name it, it just becomes less scary.
Right. Absolutely.
And it weirdly becomes, there is some instinct to explain it, to rationalize it, to suggest it's his fault, to suggest it's someone else's fault, to suggest it could never happen to me. I think it's it could never happen to me, maybe, that's the most destructive to the story we were trying to tell, that it had to feel like he was everyone. And that requires him to kind of be no one at the same time. Which sounds like bullshit, but I don't think it is. I think the less specificity he has, the more you can see in him what you need to. And it also felt right. This is one of those moments that I think it depends on how you turn it. It will look different. Is that it is clear, I think, from the first frame of season 4, that there is a point at which these two guys aren't connected. It takes a little while for that to get said in text, but it's clearly Flint's concern. And I think on some level, Silver's awareness. And it felt both meta and interesting to me that the point at which they were not connected is how they feel about story and how they feel about their obligations to it, their place in it, the burden of it. They just don't agree that there is some need to create stories to explain things. And that ultimately is the death of that relationship, that they because they have that discontinuity between them, that is the thing from which everything else unravels. It's the thread with the sweater. So, that felt right too, that we were able to kind of strangely name something you didn't think you were looking for a name for, which is the space between them, and not, specifically who did what to Silver when he was a kid.
No, and it's really interesting. I mean, first of all, I said in the podcast, like, if you're going to say horror and I'm not going to tell you anymore, like, I'm going to go to all sorts of dark, horrible places in my imagination for that, especially if it's, a backstory. So if it involves possibly your childhood and stuff like that, then you bring out all of my personal fears of what people can do to each other.
It almost has to be that. I think when you stare into that, it has to be nothing can come out of that. Anything that comes out of it starts to diminish its impact, I think, because you can't assign your own fears to it, which
Right.
are always going to be scarier than I can create for you.
And then we brought this to the whole concept of introspection, because it's interesting that of all people, Silver, who is so good at understanding other people, he's the one who can't do it of all of the main characters. And each one kind of has a different way of telling their backstory and a relationship to it. But he's the one of all of them that can't do it.
Well, it does. I think it suggests the horror from another direction, that whatever happened was so terrible that it broke his ability to exist within a story. There is something that is therapeutic about existing within a story, and something that I think is normal and also a part of the human condition, to find a place in a story and in which you feel like you make sense. And I think whatever it was that happened to him that made him incapable of reconciling that, that is his trauma. His backstory was that he was removed from his own story.
Yeah.
And then his curse is that he is stuck in someone else's story.
Yeah.
That he sort of never wanted to be in, but can't get out of.
See, now you're making me feel so bad for him. That's what you do.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to somebody else. A while ago, in a conversation you and I were having, John, you asked me if I was suggesting that Max is the secret protagonist of Black Sails. So I'm going to turn that back on you. John Steinberg, is Max the secret protagonist of Black Sails?
That's a good question.
Hey, you asked me first.
I think I think there are a number of narratives that are. We were just sort of talking about Flint and Silvers. That I think to argue which one of them is the protagonist, I think is maybe to miss a piece of the engineering.
We did that in the roundtable. We had that discussion. That was basically where we all got to, is that it could be almost anyone depending on which story you're choosing to see.
And I think if you could reduce this to schematics, which I don't know is real, but just as an exercise, I think it would be because you are watching two different stories. That's why they appear to both be protagonists at varying points, is because they're not occupying the same narrative. I think, to me, if there is another fully coherent narrative of a show I would watch that feels like you could make the argument that it is complete, I guess, in a way that feels meaningful, it's Max's. I think if what the show, I think she is the only one that, I think, I could be wrong, but my understanding of her is that she is kind of the only one throughout who has refused to allow violence to be an answer applied to an unsolvable problem. It's been applied to her, but never applied by her. And I think to have her be where she is at the end is meaningful in that sense, that I think there is some sense that she has kind of figured out an answer that no one else can see. And it's why it feels like it's baked into that scene with Marion in the library, that there's a bit of a riddle being put to her, and a riddle that isn't posed as one, but has one hiding inside of what appears to just be her being messed with. And she gets it right away. That, to me, I think it is a scene on which a lot of season 4 rests.
Wait, I just want to clarify, you're talking about the drowning the cat, yes?
Yeah. To sort of to be put to a false choice of which part of a cycle are you, and then for Max to immediately not only figure out that there is a secret protagonist in that story, that Marion is the secret protagonist in that story, and that a woman who was tired of seeing her son be abused did one awful thing to be able to break that chain.
Yes.
And it was too late, and it was for nothing, and it was awful. But that I liked the idea that Max was able to identify the secret protagonist in the other story. And so there's something I think happening that is not completely inapplicable in the bigger story, that she is the one who was able to figure out a way to essentially to get the show to end, to get everybody out of there.
She did. She ended your show for you. That's so true.
Yeah. She's everybody. It's this constant recurring theme from Bonnie, from everyone, that they are in these situations they don't want to be in. And if everyone is in a situation they don't want to be in, it does feel like it requires someone to step out of. almost to step off the stage and to sort of be able to see all the four corners of it, in order to find a solution to end it.
Oh, that's
so yeah, I don't know that she is the secret protagonist, but she is certainly a protagonist.
I was definitely messing with you there, but what you just said is really interesting to me because I have been really enjoying a rewatch since season 4 and seeing how things feel different. Knowing the end, which was something, as much as I was dreading the end, I was looking forward to being able to do. But the scene in episode 2 where she's begging Eleanor to leave with her, and then she says, "I will never, ever leave you." And that just felt really significant to me, to Max in relation to the story as a whole. Like, she's saying that to Eleanor, but Eleanor kind of is Nassau in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And it was almost like it was really quiet, but Max had a commitment to Nassau that perhaps exceeded everyone.
Well, she's also the only one, I think, who was able to make that connection. That this conversation that's running throughout season 4 is a bit of a fantasy. Can you leave civilization?
Right.
It comes with you. It is a part of you, and to separate from it is temporary at best. Mm-hmm. And I think Max's arc, if you turned this sort of three-dimensional model in the right light, the version of it that looks like her story, it's a story about a woman who is abused by it, who thinks she can run away from it, who gets trapped in it to the point at which it looks like it will be her end, and then who learns how to tame it. Mm-hmm. And she's the only one that's really trying to tame it. Everyone else is trying to defeat it or trying to kill it or separate from it. She's really the only one who's standing there with sort of the chair and the whip, trying to figure out how to get it to do what she wants. And acknowledging that it is always going to be bigger than she is and stronger than she is, but that it is manipulable. And so that makes her, I think, unique
on a
within
smaller
the
level. Yeah. That she can do what she can do and be her part of it and wield that kind of power over it. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
The thing that's amazing to me about her is that I feel like, kind of like what you said, that everyone's trying to do something else that's not as realistic. I had been tracking and had talked a little bit about how Max parallels with so many characters and so many characters that don't seem to be even, some that seem to be two sides of a coin and some that don't even don't seem to be in relationship to each other. Like, I think I have said this before, but I feel like if you find the two people that Max most, like, that you all textually most paralleled her to, it's Vane, especially in the beginning, but then also at the end, the fact that in the library scene with Grandma Guthrie, that she talks about slavery in a similar way to Vane, and Silver, obviously, because they're, they meet in the beginning and they're both looking for angles and having that kind of.
Yeah.
But what was amazing to me most is that I keep thinking, ever since the last episode, about what Vane said to Flint, the "give us your submission and we'll give you the comfort you need." And the fascinating thing in particular about that is I think Max actually found the way between those two things. Like, those seem like two ends of a spectrum. And the last scene in 410 with Grandma Guthrie, where she's saying, "Look, you wanted this, but I can't give you that. You want this, I can't give you that. But this is what I can offer you," is that she actually found the way not to submit, but also to get her way.
That there's an element of, I think part of what feels like Max's, her story, capital S, is a series of compromises. And I think in season 3, she starts to suffocate under the weight of them, that it feels like everything is a compromise that just leads to a more unpleasant compromise behind it. And that where she is able to break through, I think, is in figuring out that there are certain things you plant flags around. And that in a story about a series of compromises, it's actually the moment in which she refuses to, in which everything cinches for her, refuses to create a situation that is exclusive of Bonnie, and refuses to kind of accede to every demand that is put upon her. But I also think, I think looked at, for some reason, this all makes sense to me as some sort of three-dimensional shape. I think if you look at it in a certain light, it does look like she harmonizes with Vane and with Silver. I think it doesn't require turning the light very much for it to look like she is in Flint's story, that she is sort of abused and traumatized for what she is, who she is, and sort of has to figure out a way to shake her fist at civilization, but come up with different answers about how to do it. You don't have to work that hard for her to look a lot like Bonnie. I mean, that's text in season 2 and 3.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's text in season 4 that she is literally in Eleanor's story.
Mm-hmm.
She's 8 episodes behind Eleanor, and living the same choose your own adventure story and just trying to figure out how to get to a different ending. So I do think that part of the reason she feels central to me is because she exists in the middle of a Venn diagram in which I think there are meaningful pieces of everyone. Yeah. And I think that's probably part of the reason it felt right that she was the one that kind of is left standing at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We had a discussion in the roundtable episode about like the world of the immortal myth legends and the mortals of Nassau, and how Max was one of those mortals that was leading her. Her story was so big on its own, but so central to, or I suppose was so much hers in a way that like Flint and Silver's impacted so many other people in such these massive levels and all of civilization and society. And she had this small contained universe where she was very active and, well, and I suppose there were times where there was almost the crossover, such as getting the Spanish gold. But it was so fascinating to watch her work within this small sphere and be so powerful within it, and to have so much control within it as such a small person when we met her, as someone so low, I suppose, on that totem pole, who was able to
arguably the
right
lowest.
Her way out.
Yeah, she was the lowest when we first meet her.
I think with the Greek myth Instagram filter on, I think
yes.
She is
yes.
There is a story happening in which she is subject to Flint's story. She is trying her best for 3.5 seasons to make the best of a story in which we've just decided that it is the guys who hate England and want to kill it versus the guys who are with England. And I think there is a massive pivot in that scene with Rackham in episode 6. Mm-hmm. It's the first time I think you've ever heard her swear. It's certainly the first time you've heard her swear in anger. And it is a moment in which, to me, that is her wrestling the story away from Flint.
That is the first time. Sorry, I'm just going to give listeners context for that. That's when they're in below decks in the ship, and she's yelling at him, and he's yelling at her about their plans. And then they go to Philadelphia.
It's kind of the first time you've ever really seen her lose it. And that felt like, because from there, and I think some people have sort of seen it as a disjointed narrative. I don't think it is. I think what it is she is, by sort of sheer force of will, starting her own version of the story in which she is not operating according to the terms Flint and Rogers have set out. And she gets to the ending that way. She is able to sort of find something that has eluded Flint and eluded everybody else. But I liked that sort of all through season 3, you're watching her trying to manage through other people's terms. And the moment she decides to apply her own terms, either she's going to get killed for it or she's going to make it work, and she makes it work.
Huh. I love that. And that didn't seem at all out of place, because you see her in such subtle ways, like when she walks away to go storms away to go find Eleanor when all the men won't. And when she meets Jack on the beach, like she's always kept it all really very controlled.
I think she's the only one that's really ever seen the end of the story. I think that there is an element to that kind of conflict where I think the participants will consciously or unconsciously keep it alive. Mm-hmm. I think she is the one who is she's been saying since you met her, I don't want that ending. And also, I think, been saying since the beginning, she's the only one that really has been rational about trying to figure out where this all leads, where each decision is ultimately going to get to. And I think that's where that frustration feels like it's coming from, is where the fuck did you think this was going to end? Like, we've been in the same story for 30 some odd episodes and nothing is changing.
Oh, right. Didn't we joke at some point that Max is the only one who actually has been watching the TV show?
She kind of feels like the only person that's been watching the show. And I think
we did joke about that at some point, Liz.
Yeah. and I think is able to see there are certain realities too. You can do the things that make you feel good, and you can do the things that you think are inevitable. But if you're not trying to figure out where it's going to lead to, then you're going to be in season 3 of Black Sails forever. You're never going to get to season 4.
Right.
Which is a really cool
that I think
place.
makes it special too.
It's a really cool place. But it's definitely not somewhere I'd like to visit and not live.
Correct. Better to be witness than to be participant.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes, it was certainly interesting and fun for us from the outside.
But she feels like she's Hercules a little bit. She's the one that has to sort of do these tasks to get to this ending, and that's why Rackham, I think, at the end has it feels like witness to me. I guess you can call it chorus, you can call it narrator, but feels like witness to her story.
Interesting, yeah,
that totally works for me. Yeah,
and he had a very chorus-like speech. The truth speech was fantastic, and I can't imagine Toby Schmitz's face when he saw the script. I'm sure he was thrilled. So I'll have to talk to him about that.
I can, because we wrote it on the set.
Oh yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, it was on the day. It never felt right to me on the page,
really?
And on the day, it just kind of came out. Literally while we were rehearsing, I wrote it down on the back of the script and handed it to him. And God bless him, he got it. And I think gave me shit for it way afterwards, well after we'd wrapped.
For the process or for the speech?
Both a little bit. He's like, we're really just going to talk about art in the end of this. We're just going to go for this and do this. And,
just do the thing. Just tip your hat.
He didn't say that while we were shooting it. Thank you. But it was a weird moment of just I couldn't get it to make sense, and it was just standing there on the ship when it just kind of fell into place. So
wow, yeah. Oh wow, and it very much I think worked for both of us. I think I can speak for both of us that
it did, totally, and again it worked for me. It doesn't work for me if it's just the happy ending story, but with the
ambiguity,
it's gorgeous, and I love it.
All right, and that will segue us perfectly into.
Here we go.
Okay, so you all made a really, really bold choice, and we love this choice. What was the process of getting to this place where you chose to make an ending that could be read in different ways?
That's a good question. I think we've been very open. I think season to season and episode to episode, we put a ton of pressure on ourselves and on the story to make sure that that everything was better than what came before it, and that it was developing in a way that in which every episode, every scene, every line of dialogue was meaningful in some way. I think the unavoidable result of that is that the ending has the pressure of a lot of narrative behind it, of how do you make all of that mass and momentum both stop, because I think in some respect you want it to stop. I don't think you want to walk away from this story feeling like your head is spinning and you don't know what the hell happened.
Yeah.
For me, personal preference, I don't appreciate story that way. I want to feel something. At the same time, I think it would be unfair to the narrative to suggest that it is reducible to something simple. Add to that the complication of there is a wholly other narrative that is completely alien in some respects to our show, that we were trying to contextualize and marry this to and make Captain Flint's curse and the interim between show and book and what is John Silver's life after he decides he doesn't want to be Long John Silver again, what makes him decide to put that name back on. It's got to do all of those things too. So there's a lot of chainsaws you're juggling, I think, at that point. We've talked a little bit about it. There aren't a lot of great models for ends of shows, ends of shows that don't feel like you're just dragging yourself across the finish line. And so we looked at a few of them and really sort of tried to pull out why is this the show I'm coming back to, and what is this making me feel that feels right? Some are obvious. I think there's so The Sopranos, however you feel about its finale, it said something, and it forced you to engage with the material after the end of the narrative. We went back and spent some time with the Cheers finale. It's great. As an exercise in storytelling, it's pretty great. And a bunch in between and stuff you'd expect and stuff you wouldn't. But this just ended up feeling right. Is it ambiguous? Not to me. When I watch it, it is pretty clear to me what it feels like is happening. I am also fully aware of the fact that there are multiple interpretations of what it is. That is also by design, and not an accident. That in a story about what your place in a story is, and a story that is fully self-aware about narrative, I think at a certain point, the audience or the reader needs to have an opinion, and there needs to be space within the story for that opinion to matter. That felt right too. And it's why, while it is clear to me what is happening, I don't feel as though it is my place to impose that on anyone. I think that the act of watching it and sort of feeling an ending in that story is a personal one. I have two different positions to stand in with respect to the story, and I think that they are different. And I think if you ask me as the person who wrote it, my answer is I don't want to talk about it. It is built the way it's built, and it is for you to appreciate. Me as audience, I watch it and I feel like I'm, you know what? I am seeing the story that feels right to me.
Yep.
And it feels clear. And so if that story feels clear to you, then you are watching the right story too.
Exactly. Yeah, no. And I mean, I think
I like that.
I like it too. And I think what's been really fascinating is just, this has been throughout, from the very beginning, a story that has brought us emotionally to places we didn't expect and made us think about things that we didn't necessarily want to, or it didn't occur to us to think about. And I think that the ending that you all created kind of brought that even to a new level, like that you really had to look inside yourself and what aspects of the story are important to you and what aspects of the story speak to you personally, and that helps you find the ending that is most meaningful to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it does. And I think you are aware when you're making a show that has to appeal to a very large number of people, that a lot of people are watching different shows. They are invested in different things. They like different things. They want it to do different things. And so I think part of where the burden of the ending comes in is that you start having to make some choices about what story you think you're telling. And so that I think is a little bit where the challenge came from. Is like, well, can we land this in a way that it is still interpretable, even in its ending, in the same way that it was halfway through it, which is difficult but doable.
That's fascinating, though. I think that's really cool that you can have both.
Yeah,
as both the creator and the audience member. Although that makes a lot of sense too, because it has to do with your personal satisfaction and what speaks most to you. And to me, what always brought me back to Black Sails was that the conversation of the light and darkness and shadows and obstruction. And I think there's more room to explore that part of the theme with the ending that I prefer.
Right.
So, if it ends up not exactly a happily ever after, but pretty damn close to it, then I feel like I lose some of that catharsis, some of what makes me continue to think about these people and their choices and about myself and my choices long after the show's over.
Right. Which goes to that thing of like, you all did. You really supplied us with an ending that allows us to have different experiences. And thank you for that. It's kind of amazing.
You're very welcome.
So I'm wondering then, John, how you feel about the demise of Eleanor and her full arc. There's been some dissension between me and Daphne and Alistair, is why I ask.
Oh, right. No, I think you and I are on the same. I think you and I are on a similar place.
Yes.
Can I beef with Lauren Sarner? I'm gonna beef with Lauren Sarner, right?
Well, I think you're beefing with Alistair also at the same time on some level. Right. I don't know.
Perfect. I don't think it is a story about a woman who is Stockholmed. I think it is to me, with audience hat on, isn't fair to her. And I don't know it's how I would read the text of it. I think he, for an episode, which is really a scene, and not for the entirety of that scene, he is fully in control of her.
Right.
That immediately gets turned upside down.
It does. When did you become the person who's asking the questions?
Yeah. Well, not even well before that.
Yeah.
I think in the second episode, in their second scene together, she immediately calls him on his bullshit and says, "You don't have anything without me, so you can say what you need to say to make yourself feel better about it, but we are fully partners." And he threatens to kill her after that, which I feel like in the language of this show is always the resort of "I've run out of productive things to say." And anybody can say it. Doesn't suggest he actually has power in that relationship. It actually is a moment in which he feels like he's losing power in that relationship. Right. And so I think platformed that way, what that story felt like to me was two people who were who didn't belong where they were from, and who were unusual, and who had never met anybody like themselves before, and who did in an incredibly unlikely way. And therefore, it was a moment in which Eleanor could start to have relationships she had never had before. I don't know that her relationship with Vane was, and I'm going to use this word, and I think it really depends on how you define it, but I don't see it as a relationship that is based in love. I think they both think it is. I think there are elements of it where that is true, but not really. They are both trying to have a relationship that is fulfilling to themselves, that the other person is screaming to them, this is not what I want. And it always bothered me the way, this is now me as sort of having made it, or at least it doesn't bother me. I think you watch the show how you watch the show. But when in season 2, when she turns on him, he has essentially told her that he is a dead ender. Who wants to drag her down with him, and that there is nothing she's going to say that's going to change his mind. And that when she's saying, I want to live a life and be happy and not have to kill what we eat, and he's saying, it makes me feel good to kill what I eat. I don't know that there's a lot of people who in that situation, it would actually feel really fucked up for her to decide she's going to go down that drain with him.
Oh, of course. And
so that's what that relationship with Rogers felt like to me. It is the first, I think the first heterosexual romantic story in which both players are actually on an equal footing, and in which there is some meaningful commitment to each other that ends tragically when there is that one space in which they're not connected. And weirdly in this cyclical tragedy that she keeps finding herself in, that the only way to do what feels right is to do something that is patently wrong. But no, I that always played to me. I know there's a way to watch it where there's a lot of second guessing about what she's up to and what he's up to, and I always watched it as at face value. Two people who fell in love with each other because they could understand each other. They could understand being half and half. Half of a pirate and half of somebody who wanted something better than that. The scene between the two of them in bed, that was one take. From Hannah New, and she crushed it, and it just that to me, it's very hard. That's one of my favorite
scenes.
Either Eleanor Guthrie, the character, is the greatest actress of her generation, or that is a real moment of a person expressing "I love you" in a way that she's not able to actually say.
Right. Yes. No, that was gorgeous. I mean, I think, we talked about it some in the roundtable, and I've thought about it a bit since then. I think that what is actually interesting is that she had a speech about too many goddamn men. And I think that this goes back, I wanted to talk about this more, but the idea of introspection is that Hannah had talked about Eleanor not being an introspective person. And then I find it interesting that the one commonality between her two boyfriends, or whatever, boyfriend and husband, who are so incredibly different from each other in most ways, the one commonality about the two of them is that each of them tells her who she is, and it's not who she is. And that ends up being part of the problem with each of them. Like Vane's constantly saying, you're like me, you are this, you are this. And in the end, the problem with Woodes Rogers is that he brings, he brings Spain to bear when he thinks she's not acting like herself, but it's a herself that he defined as who she's supposed to be or who she is.
Yeah. No, I think they're so different, those two circumstances. But at the end of the day, that the second half of the season doesn't happen if he is able to hear her.
Right.
And she's making herself very clear, and he just doesn't want to hear it.
Right.
And I think, there is tragedy in that in every direction she looks, there is a man who is making it very difficult for her to figure her way out of this puzzle.
Right.
In a way that Max is able to. But I think Eleanor is kind of the first one into the breach, who is sort of setting off all of these landmines, and creating a path through which Max is able to finally find a way out.
Yeah. Well, and Eleanor is not very good at defining herself, but she, I think, more than any other character, is subjected to the definitions that other characters throw out, not just her romantic partners, but everyone seems to be defining who Eleanor Guthrie is. And I've always felt like nobody really, like maybe Flint's the one who gets closest to who she actually is, and then Max ultimately. But I feel like she's just constantly subjected to judgments by the characters, and then interestingly judgments by the fandom that kind of match that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thought experiment to think about the things. I'm not editorializing, but to think about the things she has done that I think become sort of fan favorites to excoriate her for, and either hold them up to things that men in the show have done, or imagine them being done by men. And it's very hard to suggest that that's an apples for apples transaction.
Yeah.
I think it's more complicated than that. I think it's very hard to compare two characters. They're people, and there's different spins on it, and there's different things that come with it in terms of baggage. But I think there is, if that is not an entirely true statement, there is certainly some truth to it.
Absolutely.
And I think she was sort of written that way to, she doesn't know anything else. She was raised by not just men, but these men. It's the only thing she knows how to do. And
poor dear.
And yeah. And so it felt untrue to try to protect her from that. I think you kind of just have to let her be what it is. And there is nobility in it, I think, for her. I think she is trying, I think, which is not necessarily something you can say of a lot of the characters that people do love. She is trying to make this work, and failing at times, and sort of failing to see answers that maybe she should have, but her head and her heart in the right place. So. Yeah,
but she's a messy person, and and I'm saying that with all of the sympathy I have for her, that she's a messy person. She came from a messy place, and she just didn't really. It would have been a true feat. I mean, she's not Max. I mean, Max also came from a messy place, and she's Max. So and everyone knows how I feel about Max. But
they have different relationships to violence. I mean, I think violence is in as much as civilization or any of those things as a character in the vocabulary of the show. I think violence is as well. She resorts to it in ways that I think define her. Strangely, those are the things that I think people are least turned off by. But it does sort of make her culpable, I guess, in a way that the rest of them are, and in a way that I think Max is largely able to keep her hands clean with.
Yeah. No, but that's very interesting. I feel like I was just, I guess I've spent the past few years convincing people to watch Black Sails, including Liz. But it was interesting because I just came back from Israel and visiting family, and I spent a lot of time talking to people about it and talking about violence, because they're like, pirates, is there violence? And I'm like, well, yes, there is violence, because pirates. But it's interesting because I think you said a little bit earlier that this is a story about domesticity. Did you say that, John? Did I hear you say that? And I meant to say something about it. I find it fascinating, because what I kept saying to people is that this, unlike almost every other television show I can think of that has violence, I don't feel like there's ever a place where violence doesn't have consequences. And I
think that's true. If it's not true, then it's certainly not intended to be. It is intended to be that way.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So I mean, that also, there's just, I love the idea that you made a television show about pirates, that you're describing as a show about domesticity. It
is a fact. I mean, I think it's actually a very short trip from piracy to civilization to what is domesticity the end of civilization, or is it a means by which it perpetuates itself? And I think, so that's, a sentence with a couple of semicolons in it, essentially, to get, to connect those two ideas, which I think is what was interesting about the show to us, is that none of that stuff had been explored, that it was always just Errol Flynn. And so when you scratch the surface and you realize there's this other thing underneath it, it just kind of had to be a story.
Yeah. That's so lovely. All right. Well, we should let you go because you're busy, and
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for spending so much time with us today, John.
Of course.
Thank you for making this beautiful, beautiful show. We love it so much.
Oh, thank you. It's very sweet. Yeah. Thank you very much. And hopefully more. We will keep you guys posted when we have more stories to tell.
Yeah, we can't wait. We will podcast about your stories.
Everything.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
We're on board. We love it.
Thank you.
So yes, send our love to Robert and Dan. And,
I will do that.
And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care, sweetie.
Bye.
Ready to guns! Full complement!
All right, Liz. That was so much fun. It was great having John on. What a treat.
God.
I know.
I always get really quiet because I'm just like, I don't want to miss a word. Yeah.
Yes, it's always, I always worry that we're just going to end up saying, we love your show. We love your show. We kind of do that. I do that. I don't know.
Fair enough.
We can't help ourselves. Okay. So we do have, awesome listeners. We do have 2 people who got the season, we have 2 people who got the thesis statement correct for the series finale, and we missed you all when we did the pirate names before. So, as a special pirate name session of 2 people, we've got @Faceless Author, who is the Raven Queen and is not a pirate yet, although has been an active,
how is that possible when the Raven Queen is like a perfect pirate name already? How the hell am I supposed to work with that?
I know. I feel like I need to check that again. I mean, yeah, has been part of our Fathoms Deep
Raven
world
Queen
for
is amazing.
So long, and yet not a pirate yet. I mean, pirate.
Okay,
not a pirate with one of our names.
Okay, so if she's the Raven Queen, let's call her Blackbird.
Ooh.
Instead of Blackbeard. Is that all right? Too close? Blackbird? I actually kind of like it.
Okay. All right, sweetie. You are Blackbird. So happy that you got to get a pirate name right when we are done.
Yes.
And the other person that we missed, so sorry, Megan, is @HereBeMegan. Hawkeye to Gallant.
Okay.
And she has she has one ship, which is the Marvel.
Oh, because of Hawkeye. Because I was just thinking about that. That's hysterical. Okay. The Marvel. Oh my God. Okay. So she also gets the Avenger.
All right. Perfect. And that's it for pirate names. Now we're really done with pirate names.
Fun. It's been a good time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, everyone. So we are going to continue with our post-season 4 episodes. We are going to be every other week from now on, and we have some interviews coming up, and then we'll do some special episodes with guests talking about themes and characters.
That's right. Keep an ear to the ground. We'll be here.
Yep. So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
And until then, from Common Room Radio, I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive.
Deep is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and access to other programs, please visit us at commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can be made to patreon.com/commonroomradio. Join the conversation by using the hashtag Fathoms and follow us on Twitter @BlackSalesCast. We ask that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and please avoid spoilers. If you have more to say, we want to hear it in all its spoiler glory. Email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com with Fathoms Deep in the subject line. Thanks for listening.